Hi everyone. Welcome back to English Fab, where learning English is practical, useful, and fab. Today, we're going to talk about a very common and useful phrase in English, be allowed to. Many learners find this tricky because it's often confused with words like can, and sometimes it's hard to know when to use it, especially when talking about rules, permissions, or official situations. In this lesson, we'll break down the different ways you can use be allowed to in daily conversation. You'll learn how to form sentences naturally, and I'll also share some helpful examples and tips based on the grammar we've introduced on our English Fab website. If you find English difficult, don't worry. You can translate the subtitles into English and your own language like this. Check the description below for extra details. So, let's get started. In this section, we'll explore common ways to use be allowed to with clear explanations and examples. Let's get started. 1. Talking about general rules or laws. We use be allowed to talk about rules, laws, or official permissions. Example: people are allowed to park here after 6 p.m. This means parking is officially permitted after 6 p.m. More examples: you are not allowed to smoke inside the building. Visitors are allowed to take photos in the museum. 2. Describing school or workplace rules. Use be allowed to when talking about what students or employees can or cannot do according to rules. Example: employees are allowed to work from home on Fridays. This means the company gives permission for remote work on Fridays. More examples: students are not allowed to use phones during class. We are allowed to leave early on Fridays. 3. Giving or asking personal permission. Be allowed to is also common in personal situations where someone gives or asks for permission. Example: I am allowed to stay out late tonight. This means someone has given me permission to stay out late. More examples: are we allowed to eat in this room? She is not allowed to drive until she turns 18. 4. Expressing parental or family rules. We often use be allowed to when talking about what parents or family members permit. Example: kids are not allowed to play video games before homework. This means the parents have set this rule at home. More examples: I was allowed to have a pet when I was a kid. He is not allowed to watch TV on weekdays. 5. Referring to temporary or special permissions. Use be allowed to when there is special permission given for a short time or specific event. Example: we are allowed to bring guests to the party this weekend. This means permission has been given just for the weekend party. More examples: you are allowed to skip the meeting today. They were allowed to stay overnight at the event. Now that we've covered the different ways to use be allowed to, let's go over some important tips to help you use it naturally and correctly in conversations. 1. Structure: be plus allowed to plus base verb. The verb right after be allowed to should always be in its base form, no ing, no past tense, just the simple verb. For example: correct, she is allowed to leave early today. Incorrect, she is allowed to leaving early today. It's a common mistake, but once you remember the base verb rule, it becomes easier to use. 2. Be allowed to versus can. This is a great one to remember, especially when choosing the right tone. Be allowed to is usually more formal. You'll often hear it when talking about rules, laws, or official permission. For example, visitors are allowed to take photos inside the museum. On the other hand, can is much more casual and used for general ability or informal permission. For example, you can take photos if you want. So, choose be allowed to when you want to sound a bit more formal or when explaining rules. 3. Common mistakes and how to fix them. Let's fix one of the most common errors. Incorrect, he allowed to enter the building. Correct, he is allowed to enter the building. Remember, you always need the correct form of be like is, are, was, or were depending on the subject and tense. 4. How to remember, be allowed to. Here's a simple way to remember. Think of allowed as being given permission by someone or by a rule. Use it when you're talking about official permissions, family rules, school or workplace policies, or even temporary allowances like being able to stay out late just for tonight. And always double-check your form of be to match the subject and the tense. For example, she is allowed to. They were allowed to. I am allowed to. 5. Common expressions with be allowed to. Here are some useful phrases you'll hear often. Be allowed to drive. You are allowed to drive after getting a license. Be allowed to bring guests. We are allowed to bring guests to the event. Be allowed to stay out. She is allowed to stay out until midnight. Be allowed to eat here. You are not allowed to eat here. Be allowed to use the phone. Students are allowed to use their phones during breaks. Alright, that wraps up today's lesson on be allowed to, a really useful phrase when you're talking about rules, permissions, or what people can and can't do. Now that you've seen the examples and tips, try practicing with your own sentences. Think about situations in your daily life. What are you allowed to do at school, at work, or even at home? The more you practice, the more natural it will feel. Okay, thanks for watching today's lesson on English Fab. I hope you found these English tips useful and feel more confident. Remember, practice makes perfect, so try using these phrases in your daily conversations. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe for more Fab English lessons. Until next time, keep practicing and stay fab.